workshop. My name's Kate Halliday. I work with SMMGP, Substance Misuse Management Good Practice. Lots of acronyms in my job life. We provide mostly online training and CPD to people in the drug and alcohol field, from doctors, nurses, key workers, therapists, and SMMGP about a year ago took over the membership and accreditation function of Federation of Drug and Alcohol Professionals, as it was then. So I also have a role there. Can I say, do you know, when I looked at where I was on the programme and I saw who I was up against, I thought, end of conference, a workshop on workforce development. I was thinking, I wonder how let me tell you, there's more people here than I was expecting, so thank you very much for coming, because it's probably been quite a long, for those of you who've been here for 3 days, it's probably been quite a long conference. What I suspect and what I hope is that it's people who are really interested in keeping the workforce up to date here. So we may be small, but I think we're probably perfectly formed. My background is I'm a social worker. I trained in Glasgow back in the mid-90s, and I've worked in drug and alcohol services one way or another ever since. Prison-based, community-based. So I have seen a lot of things come and go in that time. One thing that I think has probably remained constant is that there isn't really a kind of accreditation, a level for drug and alcohol workers. And in fact, I was in a workshop earlier today that was talking about concerns about that, in that we all seem to be kind of splitting off into our professions, you know, nurses, therapists. We're not necessarily always coming together as a team. And so I wanted to talk about two things. I'm going to talk to you about the drug and alcohol apprenticeships that are coming along. I don't know, can I just get a quick idea from you? How many of you work in treatment services, community drug teams, for example, in the community? Yeah? Okay, good smattering. Anyone working in residential services? Private, yeah.
I volunteer, so I don't know.
Yeah, great, yeah. I'll talk about volunteers too. Okay, we've got a couple of volunteers, fantastic. Have I missed anyone out who's prepared to put their hands up? Right. Okay, just to kind of get an idea of who's in the room. So I'm going to talk about apprenticeships and hopefully what it's going to mean. And I'm also going to talk about how we meet the CPD needs, continuing professional development needs, of a multidisciplinary team. And I'm guessing most of us are working one way or another in a multidisciplinary team. Okay, so I'll kick off with apprenticeships. By the way, I'm quite happy to be interrupted. I don't love giving big long presentations, so if anyone's got a question halfway through, it's fine just to, yeah.
Your introduction is CPM, is that?
Sorry, the CPD. Yeah, continuing professional development. So that's lifelong learning is probably the best way, and I'll go into a little bit more detail in that second part of the presentation. Okay, so from April 2007, all employers in England with a salary bill of more than 3 million, and that covers most of the larger treatment providers, have been required by government to pay an apprenticeship levy amounting to 0.5% of their payroll. So that's quite a lot of money. That's quite a substantial chunk of money that people have suddenly, as of April of last year, had to start paying. And the only way they can get it back, they can get it back, but the only way they can get it back is to put their employees through apprenticeships. And the feedback we were getting from employees was that they were really struggling to get their money back by putting their employees through apprenticeships. So I was talking to some people, I mean, some people were putting people through existing apprenticeships like administration, Other people are trying to be really kind of creative and perhaps putting volunteers through all sorts of amazing sounding apprenticeships. I think some were going through the guide dogs for the blind apprenticeship and all sorts of things just to try and get some money back. But people started to say, well, why haven't we got our own apprenticeship? Why aren't we training our own staff? So, in July of last year, a group of providers, some academics and us set up what's known as a TRAILBLAZER group to look at the possibility of doing that. What we have to do, what we've been tasked to do, is put forward a case to the Institute for Apprenticeships that we have specific training and development needs that are not being currently met by any other apprenticeship. I mean, what do you think? Do you think that there are specific training needs? Yeah, I think there certainly are. I think, you know, sometimes people say, well, does health and social care MVQs cover these sorts of things? Obviously there are some similarities, but really the kind of complexity that our workforce has to deal with, if we're going to give the people who are coming to us a really good go, you know, things like really good harm reduction, things like good introductions to recovery, how to work with people psychosocially, that's nowhere else. We're putting forward an argument to say there's a really specific need in this field. So the trailblazing group must have at least 10 employers from the sector. I can say that we've got a really full range. So if you were to kind of shout out the names of some of the large providers, they're involved in this. There's been a really big buy-in from the sector, and I suspect that is partly because there is money sitting, not being spent. yeah, it does help. But also, you know, I mean, times are tough out there. That has been a theme for me. Every workshop I've been to in this conference has been talking about the sustained funding cuts. And so there is an increase in competition between providers. My experience is everyone still wants to try and provide a good service, as good a service as possible. And so the employers are really keen to try and see if they can, you know, get a good qualification out of this. The apprentice, so it's got to be about job role, and this is all very much about the employers shaping how the apprenticeship looks. So we've got to task a standard for the job roles, and it will need to look at evidence in 3 areas: knowledge, competencies, and behaviours. Does that sound familiar to anyone who's done any training? It's got quite familiar. Who remembers the DANOS standards? Yeah, has anyone not heard of the DANOS standards? Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, I mean, the DANOS standards came around probably around 2000. They're drug and alcohol national occupational standards, and they're actually pretty good. They're fairly basic, but they're all right. They talk about things like must be able to discuss, for example, needle exchange and safe practice and things like that. You know, so they're quite specific to the sector. I mean, there's stuff in there that's about communication and all the really important things too. But they're okay. But they've kind of been sitting on a shelf. I'm guessing the people who put their hands up have worked in this field for a while, because it's not something really that is that much to the forefront. So DANOS standards, I think, are going to form the basis of the standard. You can find them online if you just search. And if accepted, educational providers can develop courses based upon these standards. So there's a lot of universities becoming quite interested in developing a course for drug and alcohol apprenticeship. I think we've got at least 5 or maybe 6 universities actively interested in this and wanting to know about it. So the process is we're supposed to put in a proposal. If it's accepted, we develop the standard. Standards are quite small, you know, there's about 3 or 4 pages of A4s for most standards, so they're quite broad. That's handed over to universities or further education colleges or, you know, other training providers. They develop a course based on those standards. And there's an endpoint assessment, so an independent assessment at the end. The government are saying this is for all apprenticeships. It's not good enough just to say I've designed this course that will meet the standard. They want someone independent to actually say at the end, yes, this student is competent in these areas, or, well, no, they haven't quite got there yet. And Federation of Drug and Alcohol Practitioners, FDAPA, quite possibly may well become part of the endpoint assessment. So, there's a few kind of myths that I came across about apprenticeships when I first got involved in this. You have to, I believed this, to be perfectly honest, I thought this was the case. To get money, to put someone through an apprenticeship course, they have to be a brand new member of staff. That's certainly not the case, and the more I have become involved, I believe that if we get this apprenticeship off the ground, the majority of people who will be taking the apprenticeship are going to be existing members of staff, some of whom might have worked in the field for, you know, 5, 10, 15 years. But because there's just been this vacuum of drug and alcohol specific training, this will be the standard that people are going to be looking for. I also think it offers great opportunities for volunteers if they're interested in working in this field. So the volunteers out there, you might want to follow this if you are interested in becoming involved, because it's a great way perhaps to get into the field as well. Yeah. Okay. Well, watch out, because I think that you know there's a real opportunity. Yeah. What do people think? What's the advantage? Do me a little kind of idea. What's some of the advantages of possibly having an apprenticeship?
I think it's formalising things. It's all up in the air. There's people claiming to have, or having attended courses, and now they have a few letters after their name. What does that mean?
Yeah.
But it's a formal standard, setting a standard, a benchmark.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's been so up in the air, and in a way, you know, I've heard certainly over the last few days about real fears of kind of dumbing down of services, and I genuinely don't believe that's because employers want to dumb down services. It's because people are bidding for contracts and the money is getting less and less, and they're paying staff less and less, and I think it does actually provide, like you say, a standard, a benchmark. You know, if I feel that the people who come to our services deserve to have a well-trained staff. And there's some amazing people in services, but, you know, working in services, but training is really important, you know. And so I think that's another add-on benefit, hopefully, is that, you know, the services will improve. Yeah. Any other advantages to this?
I think it's just been a grey area for so long in terms of drug and alcohol practitioners.
Yeah.
If you go into service, like certainly in services that I've worked in, everyone's coming a different way. So some people might have a degree in sociology or social care. Some people are in recovery. Some people are kind of wanting to do a little bit of volunteering and kind of ended up there. Some people are doing a counselling qualification, so they want to get some hours for that. You know, other people are doing other areas of study and they need clinical hours and they've come in because of that. You know, you get people that are, I don't know, studying to be an acupuncturist and have wound up because all of a sudden there's a kind of holistic element of services, they're involved in that, or massage, or meditation, or, you know.
I met a life coach earlier today, yeah.
You know, if you look at all the different routes into the profession, there's just such a massive blend. And I think like, I work in family work, so we, through you guys, a couple of years ago, we had some of our family workers accredited by FDAP for the family support qualification that you guys created, because there's nothing there either, you know? So I think that then it's the standard, isn't it? And there is no standard. And that's not to say there's not really amazing work going on, it's just that it's just a hodgepodge of kind of people from lots of different areas, and there's nothing consistent that links everybody together.
Yeah, brilliant summary of a lot of the problems. I've been working with FDAP for the last year. The people who founded FDAP saw this big gap in the market. I mean, the CQC would tell you, if they're going around residential units, they'll say that residential staff, this is the only requirement they have for training for residential staff, is level 2 to 3 health and social care NVQ. And that's it, you know. FDAP designed some bolt-on qualifications for NVQs that were substance misuse specific, based on those old DANOS standards. For this reason, you know, it does amaze me, you know, with all that money that came in, particularly, you know, in the last, well, not so much in the last 10 years, but certainly the 10 years before that, that this remained an area where you didn't have to achieve a certain level of qualification. And this does get us to a point where we might actually be able to do that. So potentially, it's really, really exciting. I mean, for the people who are interested in getting into the field, how does, apart from giving someone a qualification, how does this help in terms of actually achieving the qualification? I'm asking a question that I've got the answer in my head.
Recognised, isn't it? Because at the moment, you know, I mean, we have people that come in with a substance misuse or addiction degree, or, you know, a kind of a master's in addiction psychology, and they know they've really good theoretical knowledge around psychology and, you know, the kind of psychology of the brain and sort of that area of learning, but they don't necessarily have the practical experience, and they come to us and that they kind of get it on the ground. So it's kind of, again, it's sort of standardising that, isn't it, and giving somebody both the practical and the kind of theoretical kind of knowledge at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you're right in saying this apprenticeship will do both. It's not just going to be an academic course. People will be assessed in their workplace as well. So it's got that range of things. It's not just going to be something, if you're really good at passing exams, you'll be able to get it. You know, you need to be able to show you can work with people too. I guess as well, I'm thinking about the number of people, I've met lots of people over the last couple of days who are moving around from job to job. I think it provides a kind of standardised qualification that helps people be able to either move or be able to progress in their career. And again, that's something that has been lacking, and I think that provides a good structure as well. And also, it provides some consistency. I think, you know, there are so many projects around, or so many organisations, and some are really good at doing certain things, but maybe they're not so good at other areas. You know, if the staff are trained consistently, then, you know, I think it's going to be very good in terms of the service that's provided across the field as well. What do people think of the employers setting the standards? In the past, I'll tell you where the DANOS standards were set. I think they were set probably largely by the old NTA. Do people know who the NTA are? The National Treatment Agency. They were civil servants, basically. And I think they sought advice from the field and Federation of Drug and Alcohol Professionals, as they were at the time. But they were done by civil servants. What do you think of employers setting the standards? So the idea is it will be, you know, a range of the big providers, and we've got people from residential, private, charity. What do you think? That make sense?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
need their buy-in somehow.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think it kind of makes sense. I think as long as there's enough people there to make sure there's not one dominant employer, you know, trying to call all the shots, and they kind of know what they're doing. So yeah. So I've gone off on a complete tangent, and we'll get back to the talk. Another myth I got was, I'm a small employer, I don't have 3 million of a pay bill. I can't, you know, there's no point me getting involved in this. There's no point being involved in the apprenticeship agenda. I'm not going to send any of my people on apprenticeship. That's not the case. There are actually really good incentives. So, I mean, in a way, there's a sort of Robin Hood effect with the apprenticeships, in that the really rich employers, not that I don't know if there's anyone who's really rich, but the rich, maybe there's a few, will help to subsidise the small employers. So if any of you are working for small organisations, you may well get all of the fees covered for an apprenticeship, or certainly, you know, a good percentage of them. And in fact, there's a requirement that there are small employers on the Trailblazing group. We can't do that. We can't set any kind of standard without having at least 2 people who are employing 50 staff or less. The other thing is, people were saying, oh, we've already lost money. But people actually, if they started paying last April, but you do have 2 years from the initial payment to draw back your money, then it does get swallowed up. So we need to get on with this, don't we, if it's going to happen. Okay. Right, here's some of the challenges. People are going to be required to spend up to 20% of their time studying. And when I say that, I mean actually attending lectures, possibly writing essays. I don't know whether there are any people actually managing services. Most of you are working in that. How's that going to fit with your organisation? I think that is a concern for some, yeah.
No, I can see a problem with that.
Yeah.
I work for a I was training and trying to get my studies done. So I was training and I was working with placements, so I wasn't getting paid while studying and trying to get it all done while working. But we weren't allowed to do any studying while on site.
Right, yeah.
It was frowned upon.
Right, yeah.
So if I even had downtime, I wasn't supposed to do personal study work. I had to be doing photocopying or office admin.
Right, okay.
So yeah, it was a problem for me. Because I also had to have another job as well to kind of pay for that.
Oh my goodness.
You know,
Right, yeah.
So I think my weekends were spent studying.
Okay. Well, this is supposed to be protected time. So say you're employed by any agency, they are obliged to release you in work time to do this. So how does that affect employers? It's good for the person taking the apprenticeship, isn't it? I think that's going to be a block potentially. I've heard some employers really worried about it at a time when they're trying to put in tenders for services, the ongoing cutting of services and the costs. They're worried about whether they're going to be able to actually release their staff and still run their services. So I think that is a real challenge. Having said that, they're all signing up to it. And I guess you could argue if everybody's putting their people through apprenticeships at the same time, they're all going to be facing the same challenges. But I think that is a serious concern for people. The other one is about, if people are starting to get educated up to a certain level, and the standard that we're setting is going to be higher than the current standard. So people are going to be getting good educational training if this all goes through. I think the employers are quite worried about, if they're educated to this level, we should, you know, are they going to want more money, or should we be providing more money for them? So I think there's a lot of potential kind of rocky seas potentially with it. And I have heard a few services say, "Oh, stuff it. We'll just take the hit. We can't be bothered with doing all of this. We'll just pay out this out of our the levy out, and we won't put anyone through apprenticeships." I have heard people say that. Whether they'll actually do it or not, we'll see. Okay. And I think we've talked quite a lot about the opportunities already. I mean, improve staff retention as well. You know, if somebody's going through a training course that's going to take potentially a year, or it could be longer, and their employers put them through that, they're more likely to want to stay with that employer. So I think that is another a big plus. And I think, again, you know, volunteers are increasingly an absolutely essential part of services. So if volunteers think that this is a route into work for them as well, you know, that's another really good way of keeping volunteers and developing them into the future workforce. So where are we? Well, we've written the proposal, and we've decided on two. A drug and alcohol treatment practitioner, educational level 4, and a drug and alcohol treatment manager, educational level 5. So there was a big debate about whether that should be education level 3 or 4 for the drug and alcohol practitioner. Going back to some of the concerns that the employers had, you know, the people going to these meetings are usually high-level managers, so they're thinking, can we afford this? Can we afford to release people? Well, yeah. Yes. If I come away and say, you know, it's educational level 4, is this going to, you know, how's this going to impact on my job as well as the organisation? But there was a fairly strong support for educational level 4. And so that, just so you know, because I had to look this up too, that's above A level. That's above A level. Yeah. And educational level 5 is kind of the first couple of years of university. So we're talking about, you know, a much better qualified workforce than the, you know, level 2, 3 MVQ we were talking about earlier. We're putting forward the drug and alcohol practitioner apprenticeship level 4 qualification first, because all the advice we've had is do one first, put it through, and this one's going to be the one that most people, I think, are going to go through. And then if it gets accepted, we can move on, and hopefully it's apparently easier to get the next one through because you've learned all the lessons of how to do things or not. Okay, thanks. If accepted, it'll go out for consultation. So watch out for like SMMGP, FDAT. I'll do stuff in DDN. You know, there will be an opportunity to consult on what the standard will be, albeit it's small. But I can tell you a few things that we've decided is we had a big debate about, should there be specialisms, you know, so a specialist apprenticeship for a drug and alcohol worker who works with young people, specialist residential. Yeah, okay, you're shaking your head. Tell me why you think that's not such a great idea.
It's just early days. I think you've got to start at a point and then grow.
Yeah.
To start specialising from point dot, that's dangerous because this stuff's going to change. It's not going to.
Yeah.
industry, and there's been this kind of training instituted, and if I had looked at the course that was brought out in 2009 and what's now available, you wouldn't even recognise it.
Yeah.
Because they've now started specialising. They needed to be
A core.
start.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's pretty much what people decided was, for lots of reasons. Like if you specialise, say someone specialised in young people's work, what does that mean if they decide, oh, actually, I'd quite like to try and work in the criminal justice system, for example? Which do they have to get another specialism? And I think also it was felt that in our field, we want people to know about all those different aspects, because every bit of that is going to be impacting the people we're working with. So we've put in for one core apprenticeship standard, and we are. So I'm being filmed, aren't I? I can't be too rude about the Institute for Apprenticeships. Can I say that it's taken a long time to get feedback? That's what I'll say. But we were supposed to put the standard in at the end of, well, it was going to be sort of the end of last year. We can only do that once we've got the feedback. We have finally got the feedback via applying quite a lot of public pressure to the Institute for Apprenticeships. So watch this space, because I think we'll submit at the end, I'm hoping we'll submit at the end of this month. If it's accepted, then it's kind of all systems go. There are training providers sitting, waiting to develop these courses. There's some really good universities out there who have been training in this area for a long time, who will be able to develop these fairly quickly. When we first started talking about it, we were talking about possibly things being available from the 1st of January of next year. Yeah. I think because of how long it's taken to this date, I think that's highly unlikely. But I think there's a real possibility it would be September of next year. Yeah.
I've got a question on the level side of things. We do have a one apprenticeship in our organisation where we ask them to complete a certain education and give them the time for. And it sounds really good to have a standard. One of the things that I'm concerned about that level 4 is our apprenticeship is specifically for people who are coming from being in recovery. And what we're experiencing with people who are coming from the recovery background is a high percentage of those people have not necessarily completed education in the past or have negative experiences of education. Putting it at level 3 will mean that this level will come with a lot of first aid items, those little bits that exclude people who are a bit fearful. Because even with level 3, we've had to support a lot of our people to not give up, to stay there, to not feel less than. And I'm quite concerned that the level 4 is going to exclude a lot of people we want to actually attract to do this apprenticeship.
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion around that, and exactly the same discussion, exactly the same points you've made. I think the conclusion was that what we need to be doing is supporting people to get to that level, not necessarily via other educational routes. I think that certainly things like maths and English is quite widely available in my area. I don't know what it's like for other people. The volunteers in my area can access courses for maths and English, for example. Yeah. But I agree, it's a tough one. But I think what people felt was that they also wanted to have a good standard for the entire workforce, because that will ultimately impact upon the clients who the service is being provided for. But I agree, that is a tension, and I think that again is some of the potential problems that could come along. Yeah. Any other questions? Anything about timescales or? Yeah.
Of course, another one actually is, so you said universities are going to develop that and get, still go back to certain feelings of that education system from depending on where people come from. And is it that those courses would be linked to going to university? Because what I find is people tend to feel a bit more comfortable with the adult colleges, which actually the courses and the qualifications are as good as university.
Yeah.
But again, it's about how formal certain institution may be to
Yeah.
people who maybe have been excluded from this kind of environment.
Good question. Anybody can develop an apprenticeship course once the standard is developed. I'm absolutely certain that adult education colleges will be interested in this. It's just that they haven't stuck their head above the parapet yet. I know there are kind of all sorts of training providers as well who aren't necessarily formal colleges where people go, who will probably be interested in doing this. So the apprentice, whoever the organisation, so I'm not sure who you work for, but your employers get to choose where they send people. So if your employers and your workplace felt that sending someone for a university college was going to not work out, they could choose which provider to go for. And I know, having spoken to some of the universities, what they plan to do is drug services are all over the place. So say there's a university up in the north of England who is wanting to provide this. They're talking about doing things like almost like a kind of summer school type thing where for the face-to-face training, they would go down for a week, a few times a year, and people would attend for a full week, so they get a week out of work and go and study. And then the rest would be online, which is increasingly how things are going. So it would probably be unlikely that anyone would actually walk through the doors of a university itself anyway. But they might do, yeah, it's going to be up to the university courses. But the employers get the control over where they send people in this new economy of picking and choosing and kind of the financial packets, etc. Yeah.
You mentioned about, I think somebody else mentioned about people coming in with MSc, so they've got the theoretical side of it. If you've already got an MSc, what level are people come in with a sort of official qualification? What
Yeah.
then can they do? Because of crossover in terms of levels there, isn't there? So
Yeah.
where's the next sort of step? Obviously, it's not a doctorate.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
How is it?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, so there are, I'm a social worker, what do I do? And I think each employer will make a decision, but I doubt we're going to see a situation where if you will be forced to do an apprenticeship in order to take on the job. I think a lot of employers will be welcoming a skills mix. So if somebody's got an MSc, I'm not sure there's going to be a requirement for them to go through a drug and alcohol apprenticeship. I think I'm sure you could, yeah.
There may be an issue in terms of funding. So if you've got a previous degree, you may not be able to have access to the same student loans and apprenticeship funding because a master's will be at level 6, so you may not have the same funding, but you could choose, I'm sure, to pay for it yourself.
Yeah, I would imagine so, and that's interesting as well because it's the employers who have the pot of money. So I'm not sure. I have to confess because it's all new to me. It might be that if you had an MSc, you worked in an organisation, you said, look, I'd really like to do an apprenticeship. If your employer was happy, perhaps they get to choose. I'm not sure. It's a good question.
I doubt it because you can't do it with a degree.
Yeah.
So, if you've got a previous degree and then you go on to do another degree, you can get the same sort of access to student funding legally. So
Okay.
I would imagine those employers holding that pot of money will probably have some sort of you know,
Yeah, they'll have a ring-fenced
yeah,
amount that they've put in,
and,
yeah.
and kind of what legally they're allowed, where legally they're allowed to put that money in.
Yeah.
You know, so there may be some sets of criteria that they've got to meet for their staff.
And if somebody's already educated to a certain level,
Yeah.
I will look into that. That's the first time I've been asked that. So yeah, the answer is I'm not sure, but I suspect that Catherine knows because we work very closely with universities. But yeah.
You actually brought up another kind of word, which is I work sessionally for an organisation, so I'm not on their contracts. So how would that, whether the sessional members of the staff would have the same access, or whether we would have to self-fund it as well? It's all
Yeah.
what the parameters would look like.
I suspect, I'm not certain, but I would think you need to be an employee. I would think so, yeah. So that's an issue, isn't it? Or if people are working for themselves or in private practice, again, that might be an issue.
Hi, I had a question. Oops, sorry. So we're talking about substance misuse here, and client's best interest at heart. So if, like Valerie earlier said, if someone was going to come from a recovery background, he or she may not have that educational knowledge. They might have not gone to school, college. For them, it would be, well, I don't see it possible level 4.
Okay.
It would be a long process.
Yeah.
So in that long process and that fear Valerie was talking about, we're going to lose the people who can give, who's got first-hand experience in recovery or substance misuse.
Okay. Yeah.
Has that not come up?
Oh, it has. Yeah. There's been there was a long debate about that. I think this is one of the big challenges, isn't it? There's a few challenges to this, and I'll talk about one more as well after this. I think there's going to have to be, I think the structures to get people up to that academic level are going to have to be strengthened, and that was the conclusion that we came to. So yes, it might take a little bit longer.
In that process, we might lose people.
Yes,
Because of that
yeah,
fear, we might
yeah.
lose people who's got first-hand recovery
Yeah,
experience.
yeah.
We might lose them totally.
Yeah, I think that's a fair.
Clients don't get our best interest. We don't do justice to the clients.
Yeah, I think just because you don't have an apprenticeship doesn't mean that you can't continue to work within services as well. You know, it's not completely excluding people. So I think there's always going to be a role, for example, for volunteers. I think there'll probably be a role for staff who don't have apprenticeships. But I think I absolutely take your point. I think it's an issue, and it's one of these tensions between pushing for the kind of the best qualifications for this field, and yeah, like you say, potentially losing out. Yeah.
But surely if it's something that's kind of new and developing and emerging, then it will be similar to the situation that we have at the moment, where, you know, we do have people, I mean, I know because I worked in services and I've got a degree in drama and English, which is totally unrelated to social care, and I'm a family work coordinator and I've now got service training to become a family therapist. And, you know, I have a certain level of kind of, obviously I did a degree, so I have a level of kind of academic knowledge and application, but I worked among loads of people, you know, that didn't necessarily have a very good kind of academic background, and then were expected to kind of do health and social care level 3. You know, there were all these kind of, there was these anxieties and kind of, and I think that it was a gradual process, like you said, for people to kind of decide whether or not that was a route of study for themselves, and then it was kind of aspirational, so people kind of built up to it, and I think if that's what we're talking about here, then it will be manageable, because it won't be, you can't work in this service unless you have an apprenticeship, because we want everybody to be trained to a certain level, as long as it's kind of, well, we've got these apprenticeships, and, you know, if you want to do one, it'll give you a really good grounding, and you'll get some great practical skills that you can learn, and if you don't, and you're happy doing what you're doing, and we're happy with your work and you're happy with your work, then, you know, so surely that's the way it will move, rather than everybody being pushed into doing that.
Yeah, and I think it might happen that in about 15 years' time there'll be an expectation for people to have a drug and alcohol apprenticeship. I think it's going to take a long while for that to happen, if this happens at all. Yeah.
I am a bit concerned that it will push up the level of education, because obviously employers from their funders ask to evidence the level of qualification and knowledge when we're funded for, rather than private. And actually, when we're recruiting in our criteria, it's become, since I started a long time ago, it's become more and more led of being able to evidence what qualification your staff has. If the basic is the apprenticeship at level 4, there is a very high risk that we are going to push out and isolate, because the funders will go with that basic, and it might not be as long as 15 years, unfortunately. It can really change really fast. Because in the community, when they started saying, we're funding, but we want to see that so many percentage of the workforce have that level of qualification, they want it from now, not pacing it.
I mean, some of the problem I have with your argument, and I do accept it, is we work with, it's complicated what we do. It's really hard what we do at times. We're working with people who've got loads and loads of issues. I don't think there's enough recognition for the drug and alcohol field. I think, you know, it's a hard job. And so I struggle to argue that we shouldn't have a really solid educational basis for that. And I also think, you know, I work regularly with volunteers. And I take your point about there being a lot of people who haven't done well or haven't got along with the education system. But I've also seen them do some pretty amazing things. And I believe that, you know, if what they're wanting to do is, I mean, far more amazing, to be honest, than getting to educational level 4. So I think, I think it's an issue, and I do take it on board. I'll feed it back to the TRAILBLAZER group, but I also struggle a bit with arguing that we need to have lower qualifications, because I think it's an area that really needs to be recognised.
I wonder whether there will be an option for some kind of foundation to that.
Yeah.
Because that's what, you know, you obviously access to higher education, that's what people have been doing for years, particularly people that didn't have a kind of academic background or had left school early perhaps to go into further education. There's a kind of access foundation kind of entry point, isn't that? Access.
Adult basic education.
So I wonder if there's an option for an access level ahead of that.
Definitely.
You know, where you know, you can kind of maybe get some coach teaching around literacy and you know, like really basic things. Like if you haven't been to university, or you know, maybe you didn't have a particularly good school experience. There's a lot of, you know, our clients that come to us through recovery, and you know, they don't know how to put an essay together. You know, really, that they need some help with that. And it's not that they don't have the knowledge to build the essay. There's an essay question that they could answer, but actually structuring that. So I'm wondering whether there's something there for some kind of foundation ahead of that.
I think that's exactly, access to education type course. And certainly sort of locally we have a lot around English and maths, which I think will be what the expectation will be for this. But yes, I think maybe the culture has to be fantastic, welcoming, volunteer for us. We'd really like you to think about this, and putting in more support to do that.
Not necessarily industry specific, but just how to access level 3, how to be competent enough that you can enter a level 3 program.
Because
we run a degree program at the University of Bath in addictions counselling. So, and you know, kind of working with Kate in terms of how we separate out this qualification to our qualification, because our qualification is at level 4, 5 and 6. So the students either do a foundation degree in addictions counselling, or they do a BSc honours degree in addictions counselling. But there's an awful lot of focus at the beginning of the degree to get people up to a certain academic standard where they can put an essay together. But I mean, what I certainly have seen are people who have got their own personal experience with addiction. They're now in recovery. They've never had a lot of formal education, but we do a thing called APAL, which is where people can use their work experience to get onto the degree programme.
Requirements.
Yeah. And so, but what I've seen are students who may not have done any kind of academic learning at all who excel. And it's just because they've never had the opportunity, and they've never had the support, they've never had the right environment or the right people around them, and now they're in a position whereby I can get a degree which I never ever thought I could get. And it might be exactly the same for this. It's around, the structure and how providers are going to be able to support their staff in doing it, and what's going to be put in place by the universities, how providers and universities work together, and that kind of linked up sort of thinking really.
Yeah, so I mean, I think certainly it's going to require a big cultural change. I've worked with a lot of volunteers who've thrown themselves into working in local services, and a few months or maybe a year later said, well, that's been fantastic, but actually I realise I'm interested in working in this field now. Something that might be related, might be something completely different. If they've had a bit of educational, I don't know, a qualification, or at least looking at their qualifications, that might help them too. It might not all be about going into the drug and alcohol field as well. It's probably an aspiration we should be really, giving to people who've gone through recovery, regardless of whether they want to work in the field or not, actually. But I will feed that back, because I think we will have to do some really careful work with the employers about how this is managed.
I think we were talking about this morning, Kate, when you were in the field is not consistent in terms of how it defines its roles in working with people with addiction. So, what's an addictions counsellor? What's a drug and alcohol treatment practitioner? What's a recovery worker? What's a drug and alcohol worker? What's a substance misuse worker? And I think until the field can get some clarity around what role does what, then we're going to continue to have these debates. And so we need to kind of think about how we define what's the difference between an addictions counsellor and a drug and alcohol treatment practitioner. What's the difference between that role and that role? And until we can get providers to agree and have a set standard for each role, then I think there's still going to be some confusion.
Yeah. Can I talk about some other bumps in the road? Because this isn't all plain sailing. I know there is. I'm a bit worried that while looking at the apprenticeship that we're putting forward, that the Institute for Apprenticeships might say, well, actually, this is really similar to a health and social care basic role. So I think that's something that could happen. It hasn't happened yet, but I think that's something to see. And to my mind, I think that's a very good qualification, but I'm not sure it's going to meet the needs of our workshop, our workforce. It's, we have some really specific knowledge that we need to gain. The other thing, which, could be a bump in the road or could be an advantage, they might get back to us and say, well, look, actually, we think this is a level 3 qualification, so they might not accept it as a level 4 qualification. So there's a whole range of things that could happen in between now and then, right down to them saying, don't bother, just put everyone on their health and social care apprenticeship. So it is very much in its infancy, but look out for our updates. I'll put something in DDN as soon as we get to hear anything, so you can see it there. Any other questions? I'm going to talk a little bit about CPD. How are we doing? We've got a bit of time for CPD. Any other questions on apprenticeships? Anything? Just the most small, stupid question. Great. Okay. Okay. So. You asked, what is CPD? Yeah. So, what is it? What is CPD? well, it's continuing professional development because I've written that up there. Any guesses?
Keeping your skills up to date.
Yeah, it is. It's so what would be the difference between that and say training?
Well, the training is part of CPD. It's not accepting training as the end of. A lot of people may say, "Oh, it is that top down," when the idea of continue to CPD
Yeah.
is about coming on doing that and keeping updating and learning new things.
Yeah.
More training.
Yeah. I mean, does CPD always have to be a training course?
So,
No?
can be shadowing, can be mentoring.
Yeah. Can be. CPD is basically any point at which we learn something. I remember when I first qualified as a social worker, I was keen as mustard, really wanted to kind of get out there. And I would kind of look to the people who'd been in the field for a long time for, the answers. And, there were so many experienced people and I was always quite inspired by them. But I would be looking for really concrete answers. I think I kind of thought there's one way of doing this and I've just learned enough and practice enough and I'll find the way, and by the time I've been doing this for a while I'll know nearly everything. And I remember I think I must have been grilling my supervisor or something about something or other, and she said to me, well, do you know, the longer I've been doing this, sometimes I feel like the less I actually know. And I remember being I was kind of almost disturbed by that, thinking, well, what? So I'm just going to keep doing this job and I'm going to know less and less. But I find myself about 20 years later actually kind of understanding what she meant, in that I think, learning is sometimes like it's an amazing process. It's something you can really enjoy and feel stimulated by. It can also be quite a painful process of thinking you knew the answer and actually realising that perhaps you didn't. And CPD for me kind of explains that lifelong process for me as an individual of what learning is. So it's not my list of qualifications or the list of the training courses I've gone on. It's kind of how I learn. I'll give you an example. Has anyone used the outcome star? Do you use it in your? Yeah. Okay. So my organisation, as of April, I work part-time in drug services in Telford, in Shropshire, and my organisation was taken over by a new service on the 1st of April, and part of this was to start using the outcome star that I'd never used before. I've heard about it, I know the theory of it, we had a whole day's training on this, and I was really resistant to it. And I think kind of the reason was it's kind of like, you're saying what I've been doing up until now hasn't been good enough or something, and I need this piece of paper to tell me how to do my job. So there was all this stuff coming up for me. I was kind of, a bit annoyed about it, and I kind of, there was a bit of me almost didn't want it to work, thinking, this is like kind of saying what I've been doing hasn't been working, etc. So I thought, no, I'll give it a go. And I must say, it's fantastic. My clients absolutely love it. And it has really added something to my practice. And so CPD might actually be me recording that about how I learn. It might be a discussion in supervision about that, and recording that and having that in a portfolio somewhere. So, hopefully most of you get supervision at work? Has CPD discussed that at work at all? Yeah, so because you seem to know about it, yeah. So, have any of you, I don't know, any of you got a requirement, any of you members of professional bodies? So, Yeah, a few of you, a handful of you. So I'm a member of the HCPC. I have to keep remembering, they keep changing my professional body, so I have to keep remembering. I'm required by a professional body to say that I do a certain amount of CPD each year. And many people will be, so doctors, nurses. So you're expected to kind of keep a portfolio of your CPD. But at work, perhaps you might be asked to do appraisals and things like that. Your manager might say to you, you need, well, this happened to me, didn't it, this month, you need training in the outcome star. Where that is kind of led from the organisation rather than me. So I might have learnt from that, but that's very much a kind of training need identified from my organisation. So they're just kind of slightly different. Do you understand the difference between the two? Yeah.
I think, like you were saying with your, the body that you're a member
Yeah.
of, are FDAP going to go down the route of requiring their members to do a certain amount of CPD?
Yeah, well, so for FDAP, and do people know about FDAP, Federation of Drug and Alcohol Practitioners? So you can be a member of FDAP without evidencing ongoing CPD. What you need to do is prove that you're working in the field, agree to work to a code of conduct, and also to have someone at your workplace confirming that you work in that place and that you're actively working in the field. And you can become a basic member. But like many of the professional bodies, there's then levels above that where you can become accredited. So for the volunteers here, you might want to think about doing this, because you don't have to, when I say work in the field, it doesn't mean that you actually have to be employed. If you're actually doing work as a volunteer, that still qualifies you to. And so your organisation has done the drug and alcohol family professional qualifications. So that's one level. If you're working regularly with families, you can get accredited in that. And that's all done at workplace level by your workplace supervisors, and you have to prove that you've worked to a certain level. There's also drug and alcohol worker professional qualification that you can do, very similar structure. They're around MBQ level 3. And then we have one for counsellors as well. Is there anyone who's got counselling qualifications here? Yeah. Yeah. So there's ones for counsellors too. So there's a kind of range of different professional.
But just the only reason I didn't comment on it because I'm from Hungary.
Okay.
It's a different system.
Different. You have different bodies, etc. Yeah. So there is a way that you can get accredited with Federation of Drug and Alcohol Practitioners as well. But again, we'll have to see what happens with the apprenticeships. That might change a little bit in the future. But that's at level 3 level. So for those volunteers who are worrying about achieving the level 4, FDAP does have a structure to get people to a certain level at work as well. So, we've talked a little bit about this. With CPD, the important thing is that you document it. So I've just talked to you about the outcome star or how I learn. That's no good if it remains hot air in this room. You actually have to write something down, put it down, and then hopefully apply it. You have to also show that you've learned something from it. So with the outcome star, I would show that I learned something from it and that hopefully, as a result, my work with clients has improved. We've talked a little bit about what the difference with training and development is. Training, I've sort of hinted at this, tends to be something formal, you know, so by the end of a training course, you will be able to do this. CPD is more, sometimes it can be a surprise, you don't even realise you were about to learn something. You learn it, you think, oh, I've just learned that. So where are your workplaces? Can you think of examples where you have learned something that was miles away from a training course?
You mean it actually in your working practice?
Yeah. I think someone mentioned shadowing. Yeah.
So, Personally, I think that most of the learning is outside of training courses. Maybe that's my experience, but I feel that in terms of professional training, I've learned very little out of it. And most of it is learning from each other, from the mistakes you make, actually. It's the best learning.
It often is.
Where you've messed up.
Yeah.
And reflecting. And obviously from the feedback you get from people, training can be good into reminding certain things or making you think about certain things. I haven't found it personally a particularly useful tool of learning.
Okay, so you're saying you learn most
In practice,
actually doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just the thought on shadowing. I got an undergraduate degree in criminology and a postgraduate in addiction counselling and recovery specialist. But prior to my addiction degree, I moved into a treatment centre and I lived there for 10 months. Through participant observation, I have learned the most. I mean, even I got three degrees, the most knowledge I got it was from the experience.
From
that I
doing.
was there.
Yeah. And so that was both watching the people there who were in treatment and also the people who were providing the
Exactly,
treatment.
yeah. I literally moved in. I lived there as a resident. Although
Wow.
I wasn't an addict, but it was an amazing experience.
Okay, yeah. So any other experiences at work? Where did we learn?
I hate it, but we just started having observation. Obviously, I prefer it when I'm not going to be told in advance. But I hate to admit, again, it's like learning from your mistakes. You do learn an awful lot from that. Like, because you can get some bad habits.
Yeah.
And you're quite complacent. And it just keeps you a bit like on your toes a little bit, I think. People hate it, but it's very constructive.
Yeah.
It just keeps you kind of alert.
Yeah, it really makes you think what you're doing.
Like you're going into something you've watched.
Yeah.
You suddenly think, oh,
Yeah.
do I know what I'm doing? So I've had some really helpful feedback from it.
Yeah. Okay, so observation, yeah. That's great. Any other?
Yeah,
Well, you-
very, very, very similar to your experience. I didn't move in, but kind of doing my degree in forensic psychology and then going to work in a forensic mental health unit, I learned more in 6 months of that first job. And it was just kind of, in the deep end, hit the ground running, going at such a fast pace that, and don't get me wrong, I mean, my degree, you're taking your theoretical concepts from what you're learning and you need to be applying them in practice. But, the speed at which that had to happen was phenomenal. And within 6 months, I've learned so much, more than I would have learned in 6 months during my degree.
Yeah, and I think also these conferences. I mean, I came here from Hungary because I know that all your past experiences we are a bit behind. But anyway, and now I've got the opportunity to collect all this information and all the all the experiences that you had, and I can take it home with me, and it's brilliant.
So that's something about maybe taking a step out of work, your work environment,
Yeah.
and then sitting, think, yeah, so I think, there's lots of different ways we learn, and in fact we all have different learning styles as well. So coming to conferences, any other ways that we learn at work? I mean, interestingly, with observing people, quite often you learn as much about how you want to work, but also you can learn thinking, oh, I don't think I'll do that, And we all have our own styles as well. Some people can do some amazing things, but it's just not my style. I couldn't copy that style as well. So you learn things about yourself too, don't you? Any other times at work that we learn? Observing. I mean, part of the role of this, do you all work with different professions here? Do most of you have maybe nurses, social workers, perhaps therapists, So everybody's got their own little kind of line of training that they have to do. Their professional bodies might ask them to do certain things. How do you all work together? How do you learn together as a team? You're all working together.
Case management. So you have a, you know, ideally you have a multidisciplinary approach to your case management where you're all set, all of the different specialisms in your organisational team are talking about clients together.
Yeah.
So that the nurses aren't working separately to the counsellors, to the recovery workers, etc. Everybody comes together to talk about client caseloads and things like that.
Yeah. Do you get a chance to do that at work? Yeah, most of you do. Do you learn from other colleagues too? Because I think that's a massive area of learning, certainly. And I think for the substance misuse field, and this is someone who has worked in it for a long time, the new addition to that quite often is the volunteers, because substance misuse teams were not that receptive to having volunteers or necessarily to having people who were coming through treatment. I think rehab is the big one of the large exceptions to that. I think rehab's always had a tradition of employing people who've gone through recovery themselves, but certainly community services, it would be pretty unusual to have somebody who'd come through recovery participating in team meetings. So I think volunteers are kind of the new addition to that mix too. Is there forums at your workplace for volunteers to take part in these case discussions? So, I mean, I think the idea of this workshop was to get us to have a look at how we can all work together in a team in terms of keeping up to date. And I think what we're saying is that formal training is part of that, perhaps being part of a professional body is part of that. But you lot came alive, and probably I did most when we talked about how we learn. How we learn sometimes painfully, sometimes it's very inspirational. And that basically is the essence of CPD. And I'm not sure workplaces kind of get it right in explaining that. I think CPD becomes about going on this training course. I've just had to go through about 3 days of e-learning on my new organisation's various policies. But I'm not sure how well organisations emphasise the continual learning. I think you said at the beginning of this kind of ongoing, lifelong learning. And for those of you who want to progress in the field, you know, if you get into the habit of, it doesn't have to take long, jot down, and the volunteers too, you know, you can start doing CPD long before you get into a workplace. It's a great thing to bring along to an interview. If you can show that what you have learned at each stage and perhaps how you learn, that's a great thing for application forms, for interviews, and for continuing into the workplace too. So I think that although we all have our different routes in, I think CPD is the kind of single thread that holds us all together. It's that kind of lifelong learning from each other, continually progressing. And I think that's it, and we're probably pretty close. We've got a little bit of time. We don't have to carry on. We've been here all day, but has anyone got any comments or questions? We're all beginning to look like we need a cup of tea. All right, well listen, thanks, because you really participated well. I usually learn as much or more than people at workshops do from me, so thanks for all your contributions. Keep an eye out for the apprenticeship stuff, because I'm hopeful that that's going to come along, and I'll keep you all informed. And take a look at FDAP if you want to as well. Okay, all right, bye.